Cyrene. Just from saying her name, you immediately felt the shivers of fear while thinking about the ramp-up time for her ultimate, didn't you? After all, with all the opinions and hot takes going around about Cyrene, that's the #1 critique and fear people seem to have. The idea that Cyrene takes ages to activate her ultimate without her E2. And while you wouldn't be wrong to have concerns over her ramp-up time, there are ways to work around it, especially for Phainon teams. And the reward for the ramp-up time is generally quite worth it. But how exactly do you work around Cyrene's ramp-up time? Well, with the correct speed tuning and rotation, which I'll walk you through in this video, you'll be able to get Cyrene to activate Phainon's ultimate in the same amount of action value as Phainon's current teams. And of course, once Phainon is in his ultimate, he'll be able to stay in there without exiting thanks to Cyrene's buff. So let's get into the Phainon and Cyrene rotation, and how to make her ramp-up time as manageable as possible. But first, a word from the sponsor of today's video. LD Shop is a safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to buy currency across multiple different games, including Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, among other games. They offer prices at a discount, from anywhere up to 13% to 25% cheaper than topping up in-game. Not only are the prices cheaper, but they make topping up completely effortless. All you need is your server and game ID, and you're good to go. No hassle at all, and no personal information required whatsoever. After purchase, you can see that the Jades are sent to my account within 5 minutes. There are no downsides to using LD Shop for your purchases, as the prices on LD Shop are strictly better than the prices in-game. But the upsides don't stop there. Users who register using my link in the description below will get an exclusive 15% and 5% coupon, which can save you up to $50. Additionally, if you spend $80 in total, you can earn an Express Supply Pass for completely free. If you want to top up at discounted prices with no downsides, using a website and method that has been approved as safe by multiple large content creators in the space, then click the link in the description below to head over to LD Shop and start saving money on your gacha game top-ups right away. First off, if you don't know what Cyrene does for Phainon, watch my video discussing her value for Phainon and why it actually can be worth it to pair the two together. And just to briefly address some comments, my opinion didn't suddenly switch up on Cyrene and her partnership with Phainon. In my previous videos, I discussed Cyrene being a downgrade who wasn't worth considering in a Phainon team. That's because those videos were made during her beta. I made those videos specifically in order to track how her kit was buffed over the course of the beta, so that we could see the whole journey of how she improved with Phainon. In her initial beta state, Cyrene was not good with Phainon, thus why I rated her lowly. After her V3 buffs, I stated that her change to give Phainon 4 free scourge stacks upon using his exiting move was a huge change, and could potentially catapult her into competing with Phainon's current teams in terms of damage, while still being more comfortable than them. And lo and behold, I was right. My opinion on Cyrene is based on my testing of her. Prior to her V3, she was performing worse than his current teams. After her V3, she started performing better, and thus, of course my opinion on her is going to change thanks to the buffs that they gave her. It's really as simple as that. Alright, sorry for the brief rant, but people were not using their critical thinking skills apparently when taking in my videos and information. Moving on, let's talk about the team, the speed tuning, and the rotation for Phainon and Cyrene. The baseline team we'll be assuming is Phainon, Cyrene, Seridra, and Remembrance Trailblazer, or RMC for short. This is the best and easiest team for managing Cyrene's ramp-up time, and replacing any one of these characters makes the ramp-up time much more difficult. But we'll talk about other teams later. The goal of the rotation is to give Phainon the same amount of turns in the first cycle as his normal teams, even with Cyrene's ramp-up time. Generally, a well-rotated Phainon team will get 4 turns in the first cycle, or they activate his ultimate with an 82 action value. Let's look at a quick example of the rotation before we break it down. We rotate through RMC, Cyrene, and Seridra, and then we bring Cyrene back up with Mem so she can keep spamming her skill. Phainon is on basic attack duty, and then we just rotate through the rest of the team, and thanks to having proper speed tuning, Cyrene is able to get her ultimate with an 82 action value, allowing Phainon to achieve 4 turns in the first cycle, just like his current Sunday teams. We'll break this down in more detail later, but this was just to show you proof that it works. So, what is the exact speed tuning for the Cyrene team? First off, there are technically 2 different goals you can aim for. Phainon's current teams are able to get him 4 turns in the first cycle, so that's what I showcased earlier to show that Cyrene could match that. However, technically, the most important turns for Phainon in the first cycle are the first 3 turns of his ultimate, since you can Meteor into normal skill into Meteor in the first 3 turns. And the 4th turn is generally a bit less important, since it's not going to be a Meteor. The 4th turn is nice, just to get off a bit more damage if you need it to 0 cycle, but technically 3 turns are the most important. So you can either speed tune your team to get the standard 4 Phainon turns in the first cycle, or you can speed tune your team to just aim for 3 Phainon turns. The main difference is going to be Von Whack. If you want 4 turns, you need to run Von Whack on all of his supports, not on Phainon himself of course. If you're alright with only going for 3 turns, you can drop Von Whack and run Lushaka on all of his supports for more buffing instead. I personally prefer the flexibility of having that extra turn in the first cycle just in case, to prepare for when content gets even harder, you know? But it's really up to you. I'll cover both the Von Whack and Lushaka builds for the supports. Phainon's build is very simple. Just leave him at base speed. He doesn't need any speed subsets whatsoever. If you have a few speed subsets on him, then that's fine, but none of it is necessary. Even if you don't have his signature light cone, he doesn't need any speed substats. All the speed depends on his teammates. We will, however, mostly be looking at speed breakpoints with Phainon's signature light cone, and I'll touch on speed breakpoints for his teammates when he doesn't have his signature light cone afterward. Next is Cyrene, and her build is also very simple. In every single one of Cyrene's teams, even in non-Phainon teams, Cyrene always wants to reach a minimum of 180 speed, since her 20% damage bonus buff from her bonus ability only activates if she reaches 180 speed. Once you reach this speed breakpoint, any further speed stats on her only increases her own Ice Res pen, which doesn't matter for Phainon, and she also doesn't need any further speed for the Phainon rotation to go smoothly. The standard 180 speed Cyrene build that you'll use for every Cyrene team is perfectly fine for Phainon, so you wouldn't even need to change her build. In terms of relic sets, her ideal set is usually the World We're Making Deliverer set for the 15% damage bonus it gives, but in Phainon teams, she actually can't trigger this buff because it relies on her to basic attack or skill while her Memesprite is on the field. But since Phainon kicks her off of the field, she's never getting a chance to use her basic attack or skill after she uses her ultimate, and thus, she can't trigger the effect. Her Memesprite skill buff and attack also don't count. She can't use Sakados either, since, once again, her Memesprite skill targeting Phainon actually doesn't count, so she doesn't have any good buffing relic set for Phainon. You can just give her whatever you need to reach 180 speed. Her light cone should be the Herda light cone for the speed, unless you have Cyrene or Hyson signature light cones available, in which case, you obviously just use one of those. Then, obviously, there's the dilemma of Von Whack versus Lusaka. In general, I'm a big fan of Von Whack on Cyrene for most of her teams to help her reach 200 effective speed, which is necessary to let her take 3 turns in the first cycle. For Phainon teams, the Von Whack variant is required to give Phainon 4 turns within his ultimate in the first cycle. If you use Lusaka on Cyrene and the rest of his supports, then he's only getting 3 turns, which is fine as well. We've already discussed the pros and cons of 3 turns versus 4 turns for Phainon, so it's up to you whether you want Von Whack or Lusaka for Cyrene. Side note, but the new planet ornament set releasing alongside her isn't worth considering because it takes her too long to summon her Memesprite, and thus it takes the speed buff too long to kick in to do anything for her. Her build requirement here is really nice because it's basically the same way you'd build her in other teams, meaning you don't need to change her build or speed tuning specifically for Phainon rotations. She can just stay on the same build for all of her teams for the most part. Also, 180 speed is just the minimum requirement. If you have enough speed substats to go above 180 speed, that's perfectly fine and it won't change anything. Then there's Remembrance Trailblazer, who also has pretty flexible and manageable speed requirements in this team. The speed requirement changes depending on the Seridra build, however, so we have to discuss Seridra first. So there are 3 Seridra builds depending on which light cone you have for her. S5 Dance Dance Dance, S1 Dance Dance Dance, and no Dance Dance Dance. And then, again, there's also the dilemma of Von Whack versus Lusaka. I'll discuss how Seridra's speed tuning changes depending on which one you're aiming for. With an S5 Dance Dance Dance, Seridra can build 145 speed with Von Whack, and ideally with 4-piece Sacrados, since she can spam her skill to max out the crit damage buff. There are no Eagle shenanigans going on here. In fact, the Eagle set would actively ruin the rotation. This is to give Phainon 4 turns in the first cycle. If you're aiming to use Seridra on Lusaka instead, and you're fine sacrificing one of Phainon's turns, so he only gets 3 turns, then Seridra's speed requirement becomes 148 speed with Lusaka. If you have an S1 Dance Dance Dance, then Seridra's speed requirement essentially goes up by 10 to 155 speed, or to 158 speed if you're using the Lusaka build. If your Dance 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 is between S2 and S4, then just estimate the speed requirement to be somewhere in between these numbers. This is Seridra's out of combat speed, by the way. Obviously, she gives herself 20 speed as soon as combat starts via her technique, so in combat, her speed would be even higher. Getting between 145 to 155 speed isn't too difficult on Seridra, considering she doesn't have many good substats to chase after anyway. It's not like you can get attack percent substats on attack percent main stats, so you might as well chase after as much speed as you can get. Additionally, if you have more speed than what I'm recommending here, that's completely fine too. For a lot of people, you're probably going to require speed boots in order to reach these speed breakpoints for Seridra, so you will be losing out on attack boots, but in exchange, you always run an attack percent rope on Seridra instead of an energy rope. Since Phainon never exits his ultimate anymore, Seridra is never getting another ultimate anyway, so the energy rope isn't doing anything for her with Cyrene. This can make it a little bit easier to manage her speed requirements, since good attack ropes are theoretically easier to get than good energy ropes. Lastly, what if you don't have any Dance 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 icons available? Well, the goal of these speed requirements was to allow Cyrene to achieve her ultimate in 82 action value, so that Phainon gets 4 turns in his ultimate within the first cycle, which is the standard for Phainon's current best teams. If you don't use Dance 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 on Seridra, then the amount of speed required to still achieve this is nearly impossible to achieve. Just straight up, don't even try. You would need upwards of 170 speed out of combat on Seridra with Von Whack in order to achieve it. Just give up on getting 4 Phainon turns if you aren't using Dance Dance Dance. However, it can be okay to lose out on the 4 Phainon turns, because if you aren't using Dance 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 on Seridra, then chances are you're using her signature icon instead, and getting only 3 Phainon turns in the first wave instead of 4 Phainon turns is a perfectly fine trade-off when you're getting the significantly higher damage boost from switching off of Dance 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 to use Seridra's signature light cone. If you aren't using Seridra's light cone though, then you're just getting less turns without the damage buffing to make up for it, which is unfortunate, but you've got to do what you've got to do if you just don't have Dance 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 available. Anyway, for the speed tuning without Dance Dance Dance, you're always going to want Von Whack with 133 speed. Your Cyrene speed doesn't need to change for any of these rotations, by the way. And again, this only gets Phainon 3 turns in the first wave, since achieving 4 turns without DDD on Seridra isn't very practical for most people. There are rotations where you can use Lushaka on Seridra instead of Von Whack, but these rotations require crazy speed tuning on Seridra, like upwards of 170 speed out of combat, which is technically possible, but I'm just not comfortable recommending that level of speed. So yeah, best stick to Von Whack if you're looking to achieve enough Phainon turns in the first cycle without Dance Dance Dance. So now that we have the Seridra builds out of the way, we can talk about how it affects RMC's build. RMC can basically be built as fast as possible, but if you want a minimum stat line to achieve, I would build RMC to be at least around 10 speed slower than your Seridra. If you can make them even faster than this though, that's completely fine as well. As fast as possible would be totally fine. As long as your RMC isn't way slower than Seridra, they'll be just fine. And of course, in Von Whack rotations, they'll need Von Whack just like Seridra and Cyrene. In Lushaka rotations, they can run Lushaka just like the other two supports. It all depends on whether you're giving Phainon 4 turns or 3 turns. They also use the World We're Making Deliverer set to further buff Phainon. The other crucial part about this build is that RMC needs to be using the 3-star light cone, Shadow Burn. Not for the skill point, but for the energy. Technically, you can rely on getting hit by enemy RNG to get RMC's ultimate in time, but one way or another, you need to get RMC's ultimate after Cyrene's first turn, so that you can time Mem's action advance to give Cyrene back-to-back turns so she gets her ultimate fast enough. Thus, the easiest way to achieve this without relying on enemy RNG is via using Shadow Burn. So, all in all, here is what the speed requirements look like for the team. Keep in mind that both Cyrene and Seridra don't use an energy rope, so that helps a lot with building them, since getting energy ropes with good speed substats is a pain. Only RMC needs an energy rope in this rotation, while Cyrene uses an HP rope and Seridra uses an attack rope. If you don't have Phainon's signature light cone, then getting 4 Phainon turns is going to require some really high speeds on Seridra. So I would probably recommend just accepting 3 Phainon turns, which requires 126 speed on Von Whack for Seridra if your DDD is S1. If it's S5, her speed can be lower, but obviously she still needs at least 120 speed to activate the Von Whack buff. And if you aren't using Dance 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 at all, then she'll need 142 speed to achieve 3 Phainon turns. This means her speed requirements look something like this if Phainon doesn't have his signature light cone. And now that we've seen the exact speed breakpoints, let's go through the rotation one more time and break down what each character is doing to contribute to this rotation. After opening with everyone's techniques, Cyrene has 7 recollection stacks thanks to Seridra's technique. RMC is the first to take action thanks to having a built-in start of battle action advance in their kit combined with Von Whack. So even with lower speed, they're still able to go first and summon Mem right off the bat. Thanks to using the 3-star Light Cone Shadow Burn, we're able to get their ultimate from just one skill without relying on enemy RNG, also thanks to Phainon's technique giving energy. RMC's turn brings Cyrene to 8 recollection stacks, and then we use Cyrene's skill to give us 3 recollection stacks, bringing us to 11 out of 24. We wait for Seridra to go next to get 1 recollection stack for Cyrene, bringing us to 12. Only after Seridra has acted do we immediately use RMC's ultimate to give Mem enough charge to bring Cyrene back up. We have to wait until after Seridra's turn to do this, and we have to hold Seridra's ultimate until Cyrene gets brought up by Mem and uses her next skill, since Cyrene needs to take an action to allow other characters to give her a stack again. So, Mem advances Cyrene after Seridra. I know it feels bad to use RMC's ultimate when they're at 99% charge, but it's fine since we'll get a free ultimate later from Cyrene anyway. Both RMC's ultimate and Mem's action advance gave Cyrene a recollection stack to bring her to 14. Cyrene's skills to reach 17 stacks, after which we immediately use Seridra's ultimate to reach 18 stacks and to activate Dance 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 if we have it. Phainon uses his basic attack here to give us more skill points, and also because his skill doesn't really do anything. Core Flame stacks don't matter, since Cyrene activates all of our ultimates and overcaps Phainon's Core Flame stacks for the crit damage buff anyway. So Phainon is on basic attack duty, which brings Cyrene to 19 recollection stacks. We wait for Cyrene's next turn or RMC's next turn. It doesn't matter if RMC goes before or after Cyrene here, since they'll be able to give a recollection stack either way. My RMC here is fast enough to go first and bring Cyrene to 20 stacks. After RMC and Cyrene go in whatever order, with Cyrene's skill bringing her to 23 stacks, we end the rotation with Seridra, giving Cyrene the final recollection stack for her ultimate. Then, we activate Cyrene's ultimate, giving her buff to Phainon and Seridra, as well as activating the free ultimates from Seridra and RMC. The instant energy refilling plus the free RMC ultimate gives Mem enough charge to advance Phainon to give him the true damage buff. Obviously, wait to make sure Mem gives Phainon the true damage buff before you activate Phainon's ultimate. And there you have it! 4 Phainon turns within the first wave, which is the same standard as his current best teams. Once again, it should be noted that the first 3 turns are the most important in the first cycle, since he can meteor into a basic or counter into another meteor. And then the 4th turn tends to be a bit less important, since it's just another basic or counter attack. But it's still nice to have that 4th turn in case you need it to clear the wave. If you are only going for 3 turns though, then you'd just replace Von Whack with Lushaka for his supports with the proper speed tuning we discussed in the video. And then Phainon would get 1 less turn here. But the general rotation and turn order would still look the exact same. And here is the speed tuning for Phainon with his signature light cone. As you can see, the speed tuning really isn't that bad, and the rotation is fairly basic. You just rotate through each of the team's abilities, saving certain ultimates ultimates for the right timing, and with the correct speed and a little help from triple Von Whack, Cyrene can manage to get her ultimate within the same amount of time Phainon's normal teams can. As for the benefits of doing so, again, you can watch my video discussing Cyrene's value in Phainon teams and why she's better for him than you might think. She definitely isn't a must pull for him by any means, and there are usually more important investment avenues to spend your pulls on to upgrade your Phainon team, but if you're pulling for Cyrene and you have Phainon, Cyrene is genuinely good for him so long as you follow the rotation in this video. Now, what happens if you want to run a sustain, aka Danheng Permanent Terai? In that scenario, you would sort of have to replace RMC with Danheng Permanent Terai, in which case, Cyrene's ramp up time gets much worse. She ends up taking the entire first cycle to get her ultimate, oftentimes leaving Phainon with only 2 of his ultimate actions within the first cycle. However, since Phainon never leaves his ultimate when he's with Cyrene, it's not like you need a sustain to protect your squishy support units. And even though she does drain Phainon's HP in his ultimate, Phainon is still HP positive in terms of his healing. So you would only need a sustain in particularly difficult content, like Anomaly Arbitration. And in Anomaly Arbitration, the longer initial ramp up time isn't as bad because non-Cyrene teams will end up taking a lot of action value to charge up Phainon's ultimates after his first anyway, which means Cyrene catches up in action value by proxy of not needing to use up action value charging up Phainon's subsequent ultimates. Now, if you do end up needing a sustain in Memory of Chaos, just know that Cyrene teams aren't the only ones that suffer from it. If your standard Phainon teams aren't able to zero cycle due to needing a sustain, then it doesn't really make that much of a difference if Cyrene also isn't able to zero cycle due to requiring a sustain on the team, which tanks her ramp up time. You'll definitely want to run Von Whack Cyrene when playing her with Danheng. To be honest, I do think some of the concerns about Cyrene's ramp up time are blown out of proportion. Cyrene doesn't need her E2 in order to feel playable. Rather, the main benefit of Cyrene's E2 is that it allows you to replace RMC with a stronger buffer like Tribi, or even a stronger future buffer who isn't a Crisis Heir at all. It's very similar to Seridra's E1, where the main benefit was the ability to slot in a stronger teammate for Phainon thanks to the extra core flame stacks. Some people are also concerned about the team requiring Remembrance Trailblazer in order to rotate quickly enough, which is a valid concern considering the Trailblazer will be getting new paths in the future that you may want to use on other teams. This is a perfectly valid concern to have for the team. I will say that for me personally, we're at the end of Amphorius, and I've almost never had a real use for RMC until Cyrene's release. So how much your account relies on the Trailblazer to activate new team archetypes really just depends on your account and what you pull for. However, I think some of the concerns about Phainon and Cyrene synergy are perfectly valid. I just also think the doom posting is blown way out of proportion when, in practice, Cyrene is much better for Phainon than people think. Besides, people have complained aplenty about how they need Sunday for every team. Well, suddenly, you don't need Sunday for Phainon anymore, which frees Sunday up for your other team. So there are always going to be pros and cons in regards to which characters are free and which characters are not free to use in other teams. This is not only a Remembrance Trailblazer specific issue. I'm going to attach a video showcasing a comparison between a Cyrene team and a non-Cyrene team, just so people can see what I mean when I say that, in my testing, she's able to comfortably compete with and even outperform some of Phainon's current standard teams. But with all the nitty-gritty speed stuff out of the way, that's all there is to say about the Cyrene rotation with Phainon. To summarize, Cyrene always builds 180 speed, and then she can either use Von Whack or Lushaka, depending on whether or not you want 3 Phainon turns in the first cycle or 4 Phainon turns. Von Whack and Dance 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 are required on Seridra for 4 Phainon turns. Speaking of which, if you have Dance 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 at S5 for Seridra, then she needs to build 145 speed out of combat with Von Whack to give Phainon 4 turns, or 148 speed with Lushaka to give Phainon 3 turns. If your DDD is S1, just add 10 speed to these numbers. And if your DDD is somewhere in between S1 and S5, just estimate in between these numbers. If you aren't using Dance 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 on Seridra at all, then it's nearly impossible to give Phainon 4 turns, and you should just always settle for giving Phainon 3 turns by building Seridra with Von Whack and 133 speed. If your Phainon does not have a signature light cone, then Seridra won't be able to get him 4 turns, and should just settle for giving him 3 turns with around 126 speed on Von Whack and DDD, or 142 speed if you're using a light cone on Seridra other than DDD. For RMC, as long as they're not too much slower than Seridra, you'll be fine. If they're faster than Seridra, even better. Additionally, if your Phainon is E2, then he theoretically needs less turns in the first cycle if he's able to clear it in just 1 or 2 turns anyway, in which case, you can aim for the builds with lower turns that utilize Lushaka instead of Von Whack if you'd like. But again, I personally like the flexibility of the Von Whack builds just because it's nice to prepare for scenarios where you do need that 1 additional turn in the first cycle, even with an E2 Phainon, but it's up to you. Again, the builds are actually fairly standard and simple to achieve, with the only caveat being triple Von Whack on all 3 supports if you want 4 turns, and deciding whether or not you'd rather sacrifice 1 turn to use Lushaka instead. But Von Whack setups have just always been good for Phainon teams anyway, so it's nothing super out of the ordinary. If you're not interested in investing into Cyrene for Phainon for whatever reason, whether it be because you're not a fan of the rotation, or because you don't like Cyrene's kit or her character, that's totally fair and valid. I agree that there are usually other options to invest into to upgrade your Phainon team if you're willing to do so. But Cyrene is nowhere near as horrible for Phainon as some people might have you thinking she is. And hopefully I've thoroughly explained why and how you can manage her ramp up time in Phainon teams so that you can feel a lot more relaxed and confident about how to play them together. together. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you found the video helpful or enjoyable at all, and leave any questions you may have in the comments. There's still more Cyrene content on the way, including a more general overview of how she performs with each of the Crisis heirs. I know many other content creators have already given their takes on it, but I'll be throwing out my more general take on Cyrene soon enough within the next few days. So subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on that video or similar videos. Until next time!